Truth or Dare? Clearly a game that the execs in Hollywood were playing when this film was being cooked up. And it probably went something like this. Truth or Dare? Truth? We've run out of ideas, haven't we? Yeah. Truth or Dare? Dare. Make a movie out of the game we're playing. You're on. And here we are. A silly, usually naughty, frat house party game that somehow ended up being a pretty decent thriller. I mean, wow. You would think a movie based around this game would be a modern-day American Pie, but it wasn't. It was more like almost Hitchcockian. These friends are in Mexico, they're partying, they're drunk. Someone has them play Truth or Dare in an abandoned church, and they're cursed. They gotta play a game, or do a dare, or tell the truth, or do a dare, or die. And it was a surprisingly effective bit of thriller content. The cast? They felt like typical slasher fodder, but we get a bit of backstory and character interaction, which made them feel a little more human, which I appreciated. Their various problems felt all too real, and you sort of got to care for them as the story went along. As for the villain, quote unquote, because there isn't a tangible villain, it's more like, well, I don't want to spoil it, but let's just say when the villain shows up, his face is all distorted in a weird, like, Joker-esque smile. And the CG they used for the villain face, it looked so well blended. The face almost looked practical. I had to give props to the effects crew because that was a very convincing effect. Except for one location shoot, but honestly it didn't detract from the film because they had plenty of practical sets and locations which made up for that one slightly less than top-notch bit of CG. The music was very undertoned. I almost wasn't sure there was any music, because it's like they were doing this stuff in silence. Well, except for talking, of course. But that's what was so good about the music. It didn't overly punctuate anything, so you could focus on the drama that was unfolding. There was little to no gore, which I honestly appreciated. It's gotten so bad these days that you get desensitized, so when something shocking happens, it's not shocking, it's boring. But with this film, the sound effects and the character reactions combined to make each, well, I don't want to spoil it, but each thing that I don't want to spoil, very visceral. I felt it every time a character went through something. And that includes the jump scares. Because while there were jump scares, they weren't obvious jump scares. The setup was obvious, but the payoff was sort of a bait and switch, which really helped drive home the fear factor. No relation to the show. I would say Truth or Dare is a pretty, like I said, decent flick that, while tame, is not so tame that you don't want people to see it. People should see it. In fact, this is a good film to get people into horror, because the story is short and sweet, but it's not overpowering. It's something worth seeing at least once, and I would call it a gateway film. You see this, you see what the producers made, what else they made, which was Happy Death Day and Get Out. Both films I recommend along with this. And most likely people would get hooked on horror. This was definitely worth the price of a movie ticket. And definitely worth putting on Netflix. Now, all I need to do is ask one little question concerning this film. Truth or dare? Okay. I did not see this coming. I vaguely remember the Rampage video game in arcades back in the 90s. I was an 80s baby and a 90s kid, so arcades were still a thing. And this game, while cool, I never paid much attention to. I was more of a Star Wars first-person shooter kind of guy. But somehow, someway, they took not only a video game, but a semi-obscure 80s arcade game and made it into a darn decent action movie. Once again, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson brings it full force and provides us with a character who's not only awesome, but has depth. You really want to be his friend in the movie. He's basically an ex-soldier guy who became a conservationist, and he's friends with a sign language savvy white ape. And let me tell you about this ape. He was so well done. For most of the flick, his effects looked practical. I mean, I knew he was CG, but clearly someone's been upping their game with the whole motion capture environment. Because it looked like a guy in a suit. All the apes, there were multiple apes, they all looked like people in suits. Or possibly real animals. With the exception of the white ape, of course, because so far there isn't a lot there aren't a lot of white apes in reality. But these ones look so real. And as for the other characters, you got a female potential love interest who's not a damsel. She's actually got some backstory. And you got the villains, which range from pretty stereotypical corporate jerks to trigger-happy soldiers of fortune to one character whom I don't want to spoil, who actually helps the heroes but clearly has a sinister agenda, although it might be because of the actor who played him. I don't want to spoil it, but you'll see what I'm getting at if you see the movie. And trust me, you should see this movie. It's got action, drama, suspense, comedy. It, surprisingly, for a video game movie, it doesn't feel like it's gonna succumb to the curse of video game movies. It's like the Lara Croft game, or not game, Lara Croft video game movie I recently reviewed. It's definitely a curse breaker. I don't think Rampage is gonna flop, because besides the characters and the effects, the creatures were phenomenal. Everything and everyone had weight, and it really did feel like a city was being taken off the face of the earth. The story, I don't want to spoil it, but there's an actual story. I mean, they took a game that basically has you wreck a city and gave it a real, honest, believable, yet still sci-fi-ish story. And while they technically sequel baited, I don't know if we're going to get a sequel, but if we do, I think I know who's going to be the villain. Once again, I don't want to spoil it. You gotta see the movie to believe it. Anywho, that's about it. Rampage was really good. Truth or Dare was really good. See them both. And this is Mr. J signing off. I'm reminding you, don't play games with strangers, and don't mess around with strange canisters that fell from the sky.